Hi everyone. It seems that when most academics investigate the question, where was Camelot? The automatic response is, well, Camelot wasn't real, because it's first mentioned in 12th century literature, whereas it was supposed to have existed in King Arthur's time in the 6th century, and yet there's no record of it between the 6th century and the 12th century, which is not what we would expect if it really existed. So therefore, because Camelot first appears in the 12th century, it was a fictional place. And you can kind of see the appeal with that logic, can't you? But like most things in life, it's not that simple. Now the reason is because in reality the question was Camelot a place that really existed in the 6th century and really was used by Arthur, has nothing to do with the question, where was Camelot? Now you might be thinking, how does that make sense? Because how could Camelot be anywhere if it didn't really exist? Well, think about it in the sense of Tintagel. So with Tintagel, that's a site which appears in the Historia Regum Britanniae by Geoffrey of Monmouth, associated with King Arthur's conception. And most scholars in the past, decades ago, believed that Geoffrey of Monmouth chose this location to be associated with Arthur's birth or with Arthur's conception because it was a fairly prominent location in his time, in Geoffrey of Monmouth's time, and that there was no prominent settlement there in the 6th century. That's what most scholars believed in the past. Now, as it turns out, archaeology has shown that to be wrong, and that there was a significant settlement there in Arthur's time. But let's imagine, just for the moment, that that conclusion of past scholars is correct. Let's imagine, just for a moment. So what would that mean about Tintagel? So we have this record of Tintagel associated with Arthur, but actually it didn't exist in Arthur's time, let's suppose. So the conclusion we could come to is that Tintagel was fictional? Well, no, obviously not. That's a silly conclusion. Just because it didn't exist in King Arthur's time doesn't mean it's fictional. It doesn't mean that Geoffrey of Monmouth didn't have a specific location that he was talking about, a real location, when he mentioned Tintagel. It would just mean that it's anachronistically associated with King Arthur. So you see how the question of was this particular place really around in King Arthur's time and really was associated with him, that has nothing to do with the question of where was this place located, or even was this place real? Those are two completely separate issues. So the question of where was Camelot has nothing to do with the historical 6th century. The question simply is, when those writers from the 12th century onwards referred to Camelot, did they have a real specific location in mind? And if so, where was it? Well, we know in the case of Thomas Malory's La Motte d'Arthur that the preface, it was written by William Caxton. We know that in that case, the writer William Caxton had a specific location in mind because he actually refers to the fact that diverse people have gone to see the remaining grand stone walls of Camelot in Wales. So he had a specific location in mind. He referred to these existing ruins that were still there for people to see. So again, this has nothing to do with whether it really existed in King Arthur's time or whether it was really used in King Arthur's time. It has nothing to do with that. The point is that he had a specific location in mind, a real location. And so when Thomas Malory, in the main part of La Motte d'Arthur, when he refers to Camelot, well, presumably he was referring to the same place as William Caxton was referring to. It's true that he says that it's called in English Winchester, which would seem to place it in England, but he also refers to the prominent church of St. Stephen in Camelot, and there has never been a church of St. Stephen in the Winchester in England, which leads me and various other researchers to believe that when he said it's called in English Winchester, he didn't mean that it's the Winchester in England, he was simply translating the name. Now, Caerwent is the exact Welsh equivalent of Winchester. The elements are identical. and the grand stone walls of Winchester are still there in Wales for all to see. So there are many people, myself included, who think that when William Caxton referred to these grand stone walls, he was talking about Caerwent. And so that would mean that the Camelot of La Motte Arthur, at the very least, was a real place, and specifically, we can, in my opinion, identify it with Caerwent. Maybe the Camelot of other records is a different place. Although I don't think it's necessary to come to that conclusion. I think that actually the very earliest appearance of, or the very earliest reference to Camelot, which was in the 12th century, it's mentioned as being just within a day's journey of Caerleon in southeast Wales. So that fits in perfectly with Caerwent as well. So I think all the references to Camelot, pretty much all of them, are consistent with it being Caerwent. But even if there was a different location that fits, the point is that the question, where was Camelot, which presumes that Camelot was a real place, has again nothing to do necessarily with the historical reality of 6th century Britain. The fact that Camelot isn't mentioned in any earlier records of Arthur until the 12th century, it does absolutely nothing to indicate that Camelot was a fictional place, or that Camelot can't be located anywhere because it never really existed. Those two things, that does not follow. The investigation of where Camelot was, where these 12th century and beyond writers were talking about when they mentioned Camelot, that's absolutely a valid area of investigation. So maybe Camelot was Caerwent, maybe it wasn't, but it absolutely is worth looking into where Camelot was located, where these writers had in mind when they referred to Camelot.